Hello, this is Angelia, and you're listening to or watching the podcast Why You Do What You Do, the podcast that talks about human development and psychology to maybe help you figure out a little bit more about why you do what you do. And last time we were talking about three basic approaches, for reasons for abnormal behaviors. As the explanations that were then offered, as well as previous explanations, can themselves be placed in three categories. And I left you there yesterday, and now today we're going to talk about those three categories. Number one is internal. The focus here is on the internal operations of the individual. So what's going on inside of you? Physiological explanations, which emphasize genetics, biochemistry, or neurological changes, and the psychological explanations, which involve the mind and emotions, are both internal. So those are the things that have to do inside of you that can be causing abnormal behavior. Genetics, you can't do much about that. You get that from your parents, and oh well, there it is. Biochemistry. Sometimes you have chemical imbalances in your body or in your brain, and sometimes those can be treated with medication. Then neurological changes. Like my husband had a stroke, and my father had a stroke. My husband has brain damage. He has a spot of white matter now in his brain. And then my father just found out after a fall, and he had tests done at the hospital. And I'm not even supposed to mention his name. Anyway, someone I know. Has some, now there that's showing up on X-rays. These are going to affect them because once that starts, it usually continues until the person ends up with dementia or Alzheimer's or something like that. So both of them are now on that road, that's kind of worrisome and scary that there'll be a problem that can't be helped because it's the actual physicality of the brain now. You can't turn white matter into gray matter. That doesn't work that way. Once that area is dead, it's dead. That's it. It's done. So those things are things that are internal and may or may not be able to be helped. External. Changes within the individual originate in some external force. The focus, however, is on those external forces and how they influence behavior rather than on how they operate within the individual once they are experienced. If someone treated you a certain way, you might have a reaction to that. And that would be an external factor because it was something that was done to you. And if you are traumatized, you're going to have a reaction to that. If you lose your job or whatever, you're going to have a reaction to that. And those are external forces that are, coming upon you. Interactional. The emphasis here is on the simultaneous operation of both internal and external factors because you can have both. Thus, a particular kind of behavior will occur only in persons with a particular kind of biochemistry or internal who are also subjected to a particular kind of stress, which would be external. So, like I was saying last time, I might be more resilient than the next guy because maybe the next guy has a biochemical problem also, and this thing happened to him, so now he has a bigger reaction than I would have. Example is people with anxiety. I have a few traumatic stress symptoms left. I used to have full-on PTSD. Now I have maybe a few PTSSs. But, people with anxiety cause me stress because I don't get the need for such control, the need for, oh my God, what's going to happen? dude, we're not even there yet. This is a month down the road. Why are you worried about this? This is years down the road. Why are you worried about this? But people with anxiety, that's just, the brain is rolling like that. And so, like I said, if someone who is triggered by stress can be stressed out by someone else's anxiety, and it's like, no, go, stop, yeah, no. So these things can play a part. If you have an internal problem and then an external problem comes about, that can be a double whammy for you. Like if someone has biochemical depression, and then they lose their job, or the marriage is failing or whatever, then that can be a double whammy, for them, because they're predisposed to this anyway. And people have committed suicide and gotten into worse situations because they have both of these things going on. We believe that the interactional approach is ultimately the one with the most validity. Since the interactional view is a blend of both internal and external factors, however, each of these approaches must be understood before it can be described. And that's why you go with this, so they can figure out what's going on before they can say, aha, this is this, that is that, and that caused this. So, that's why I say, don't be afraid to go to therapy. If you got a problem, just go. Just let them figure out what's going on so you can have a better life and get it behind you. This holds for the very general study of etiology. It is also important to recognize that at any period of time there can be a wide variation among individuals in how completely they accept any of the societal theories of etiology and how they accept their society. There are folks who are uber traditional. This is how it's been done for thousands of years. This is the way it is. Then there's people who are more free thinkers. And they're like, well, I know that's how it's been done for thousands of years, but to me, look at this. I think this would be a better way. And of course, usually those two groups butt heads, because, traditions can be handed down and things that learn, but sometimes traditions hold people back. Sometimes a traditional way of doing things is not the best way of doing things. And people need to think for themselves and, do what's best for you and everyone involved. So the free thinkers got an edge on the, more traditional folks in that regard. For example, today it is commonly known that certain forms of abnormal behavior are caused by an impairment of the brain's normal functioning, usually due to some organic pathology, such as a tumor or a blow to the head, or, like I said, a stroke. I know people who've had, I knew a woman who I was friends with in school, and she had a traumatic brain injury. And I got to know her again and tried to get her involved in, the charities I was doing and everything. But she was not the same person. She was way out in left field. Her thinking was not straight. Her reactions were over the top, emotional. I eventually had to say, we can't do this anymore. We can't, because you're causing harm to our agency. You're causing stress to the people around you. So I'm sorry, but we can't do this anymore. And that's sad when someone's problem keeps them from, doing what they want to do, but sometimes it's a fact. Like my husband's forgetful. He can't remember to take his pills. Sometimes I have to prompt him. I'm going to have to start that again because he's forgetting again. But, sometimes there's just problems that cannot be fixed. They cannot be solved. So, that's sad when that's a thing. But sometimes, there's an organic problem that cannot be fixed with medication or therapy. Nevertheless, we often hear people say that the stricken person was working too hard, or dating too many people, or drinking too heavily, or overeating, and that's all depends on what the case was there. We can assume that the person was working too hard, they might have had a heart attack or a stroke. If the person was dating too many people, they might have got, VD or, pregnant or whatever. And drinking too heavily, of course, you become, an alcoholic or have cirrhosis or whatever. And, of course, overeating, we all know what that leads to. So, all these causes suggesting that the problem was a result of the person's negligence or moral impurity. That's always not the case. You don't know what's going to happen, and, there can be negligence. I know that if I sit there and go eat a pack of cookies now, that's not going to be good for me. Especially, if I'm crossing over into diabetic. That's not a thing I should be doing. But, suppose I find out my husband loses his job and he's already got brain damage and he's close to retirement age. What's going to happen now? Is someone going to hire him? Are we going to be starving and, on the streets or whatever? So that might cause me stress where I feel like I need to go eat a pack of cookies. You know what I'm saying? So, but, I might have the willpower to say, no, I'm not going to do that. But a person's negligence is not always the reason why something happens. You can be predisposed, and sometimes stuff happens to people and it's not their fault. There are people who are poor because, one of my own sons, he had a great job making, over 6 figures a year, and suddenly his company says, yeah, we're not going to keep our place open anymore. We're going to sell out and move out. And so there he was. He just bought a house. He just moved his girlfriend and her daughter in there, and suddenly he's got a home that he's paying a mortgage on, and that 6-figure income was gone. Poof. So, sometimes stuff happens through no fault of people's own. It just happens, So these people who throw up their moral judgments on other people, they're not being helpful. They're just being critical, and they just are probably miserable people who like to make other people miserable too. So if people are talking about other people's moral impurity, you don't want to listen to that, because again, whoever is without sin cast the first stone, and I don't see no stones flying, do I? So it seems our rationalism is really only a thin veneer, because it is. You can say anything. You can say in a situation you do this or that, but if you got into a situation, especially if it's your children or whoever, you might do things that you don't think you would do. I don't think I would kill somebody, but if I was behind them and I had a gun and they had a gun and they were pointing to one of my children, I might shoot them in the back of the head, or the side of the head, and hope they fall away from my kid, and don't pull the trigger or whatever. I don't like to think I would do that, but I might in that moment, because I don't want to ever say I wouldn't do a thing, because I don't know until I'm in that moment. So, you can rationalize all you want, but our rationalizations are, once you scratch the surface into reality, might not be the actual reality of how you would behave. At the root of the idea that someone was asking for it is a deeply moralistic assumption. Because again, you can be holier than thou all day long, but then when you get put in that situation, you might not end up being so holy. So it says, if people are able to foresee all the consequences of their behavior and should therefore direct their actions to avoid such negative consequences. And again, like I said, you can't. When you're in the moment, it's just a shame. And I worked with a woman who had an agency, and she was a former prostitute. She did not choose to get into that. That was not her choice. She came up in an abusive home, and she chose to run away. She ended up with a boyfriend who was abusive, and then he started kind of pimping her out to other dudes for money. He said, "Come on, babe, we need the money," and she got into drugs with him, and we can get the drugs and everything like that. So that's how that started. She didn't choose to be a prostitute. It just, one thing led to another, and she ended up in that situation. So, again, your moral judgments might not be as moral as you think. If you were a 14-year-old girl and found yourself on the street, how were you going to eat? How are you going to pay for anything you need? Yeah, those are the questions. So, while this may be the way people ought to behave in quotations, there is little straightforward evidence to prove that this is the way they do behave. Because again, like I say, you never know what you're going to do until you're in that situation. You can moralize all day long. I would never. Okay, well, what if you were in this situation and this would happen? Because I've turned that on some people before. Okay, you would never do that. Okay, what if that was your child? What would you feel about that? Because there was one guy who was trying to argue that a 14-year-old or 16-year-old girl knows what she's doing or whatever. I said, okay, let's take a look at this from a different point of view. What if your daughter was walking along and this dude, oh, I'd kill him. Okay. Well, you just said. So, we can moralize all day long, but when we scratch the surface on that, you really don't know what you're going to do until you'd be in that situation. So, don't do that to other folks. You can give people advice. You can say, well, this is what I believe, or this is what this says. But when you're looking down your nose at other people, you really just look cross-eyed. You just look silly. So don't do it. And remember the old saying: if you're pointing at others, you got 3 fingers pointing back at you. So stop judging other folks. That's all I'm saying. And what about those people who do not suffer because of their negligence or loose morals? And we know there's plenty of those people, in the world today. They doing whatever they feel like and doing whatever they feel like to whoever they feel like all over the place. And they're not suffering. They're having a gay old time. Some people who drink a lot or work too hard are both successful and healthy. So again, it doesn't always hurt them. On the other hand, many perfectly moral people suffer like Job. And I know plenty of those people. Good people, salt of the earth people, barely scratching by, barely making a living. One thing after another happens to them. And it's like, why? My gosh, give this person a break. Historical perspectives, blah. Using the internal-external conceptual model, you will see that society's explanation of abnormal behavior has constantly shifted back and forth between internal and external. But it is the story of our society's basic development as well. Because, people, things come and go. And it all might be, oh, they're a bad person. Oh, well, this happened to them, so, that's why this happened. So you have 2 schools of thought a lot of times. We're having that problem here in the good old USA right now. You got these ultra-conservatives, ultra-liberals fighting constantly. Rest of us in the middle like, dear God, just stop, shut up, both of you. Because the rest of us are stuck in the middle of your crap and we don't want to be. So, ancient explanations. We have very little direct evidence on how prehistoric civilizations explain deviant behaviors, because of course none of us were there. However, their views were probably similar to those maintained by the few primitive cultures that exist today. And there are still a few cultures who have not had contact or have had very little contact with the outside world. Because of extreme geographical isolation, such groups have remained apart from mainstream society as we know it. The studies conducted by cultural anthropologists such as Margaret Mead indicate that most primitive people tend to place the blame for all misfortune on evil spirits. It's easy to conjecture that people frightened by the strange actions of someone afflicted with something like schizophrenia would naturally assume the person's body was housing a different spirit, an evil spirit or devil, since the person's actions were bad and crazy. And again, also bipolar. I know some people who are bipolar. And one minute they might be the nicest person in the world to you, and the next minute they're just evil as shit, excuse my language, saying mean stuff to you and doing crazy things. So, you can easily see how primitive folks were like, they have a demon, Of course, it was equally possible to be possessed by good spirits in their belief system, and this was generally how such behavior was explained when it could be used to further religious or mystical purposes. And of course, we know there were plenty of guys, who claimed to be from God, who were mystics and things like that. And there were people who were, from God. So, in ancient Greece, for instance, a person who could enter a trance state and predict the future was esteemed as an oracle. They would go seek out the oracles because, they could help them. So that was a good thing back in ancient Greece. The Bible records many seizures, trances, and visions that were considered to be of divine origin. And then the question becomes, were they or not? Well, maybe some of them were, maybe some of them weren't. We don't know. Even today, such unusual behavior as glossolalia, or speaking in tongues, is regarded as divinely inspired in Pentecostal sects throughout the world. And I went to a church where the people were speaking in tongues. And, I felt like discernment is maybe one of my gifts, but I don't feel like speaking in tongues is. I just never did that to me. I've been filled with the Holy Spirit and had, thoughts. I've had, dreams. So, I feel like that's where in my gift lays. But this woman, she said, I didn't hear you talking in tongues. I said, no, I don't think that's one of my gifts. She goes, oh, you have to do that here. If you don't do that here, they're going to assume you're not a real Christian. She said, it's easy. Just open your mouth like a baby and go, I. And so I'm standing in a church, and this woman is telling me how to fake the Holy Spirit. But since I've read the Bible over and over again since I was like 13, I know faking the Holy Spirit is a major sin. So we didn't go to that church anymore. Because, I'm like, when the lightning bolts come down, I don't want to be standing here. But, that's sometimes a thing that people do that, they may or may not be doing. And then, since most abnormal behavior involved norm violation, especially in the 5 primary areas of socialization, the consensus was that evil spirits or demons were in possession of the individual. So, and really, that has come up even into the 1800s, and even today. There are still exorcisms being performed today. Now, some of the stuff I've seen, I think, well, maybe they were. Maybe there's a little more going on than mental illness there when you see people, doing superhuman things and, speaking in other languages and these voices that aren't theirs. That's probably not something that a mental illness is capable of doing. Again, the Bible chronicles many behaviors that were regarded as the work of evil spirits. However, it is often unclear if the possession occurred first and resulted in norm violation, or if the norm violation occurred first and caused God to withdraw his divine protection, which then left the person open to the possession. Now, that's what I have gleaned from reading the Bible and books from different authors over the years, is that you have to open yourself up to that. You have to be a person who is not living right, not living, in Christ, and you're allowing stuff to come into your circle, into your being that is evil, and then that can take a foothold and it can escalate. So, that's why I pray on a daily basis. I read my scripture. We have holy water in the house. We have a cross that was blessed and has a little thing of holy water in it, from a priest. So, because we have an old house and many people have died in this house, and my kids have seen dark shadows, and I've seen one or two, my husband. So we like to keep our house protected because we don't want that stuff. We don't want that here. That can go away. That can go somewhere else. We're not welcome it here. Of course, my mother-in-law thinks that my husband listening to rock and roll music is inviting it here, but that's a whole other story. The rationalism of classical Greece. As early as the 5th century BC, a strong rational movement had developed in Greece. A movement founded on the belief that human reason was able to understand nature. And to a certain extent, we can, but not everything. And it's back to the thing where a lot of people say you can either have religion or you can have science. You can't have both. And I disagree with that 100% because I believe God created science. And then maybe someday science will prove that God exists. So, I believe you can have both. You don't have to pick. Such a rational approach led to the general theory that there were natural explanations for all things, the task of humankind being to discover these explanations. And now, I believe as a human being, you have a responsibility to not be ignorant and to, if you have a question, me and my husband, we love Google. We're so happy that Google came into our lives because now it's like, we don't know this. I don't know that. Do you know that? How does that work? Google, because they can look it up and figure it out and find out and tell us how it works. And then we don't feel ignorant. We know. So I think learning all you can about everything you care about, and certainly you don't have to look up something you don't care about, because there's stuff I don't care about. Like, yeah, I don't care. But if it's something that excuse me, impacts your life, something you're interested in, then I believe you have a responsibility to learn all you can learn, just so you're not being an ignorant, crazy fool, and making the world a worse place by spreading your ignorance around in it. This led to a rejection of supernatural explanations for both physical and psychological disorders. And now that's why some of these philosophers, early philosophers, were pretty unpopular in Greek and Roman society because they were up into their gods quite a bit. And so if these people were saying, yeah, we don't need these gods to explain what's going on, there's an actual explanation for this, of course their leaders were not going to like that so much, because then that was going against their cultural system. So, they were a little unpopular. And one of them even was like, he killed himself so that the other people couldn't get him. So one of the leaders of the rational movement was the physician Hippocrates, who has come to be regarded as the father of modern medicine, because he kind of started it all. While many of his contemporaries were insisting that physical and mental illness were controlled by the gods, Hippocrates developed a naturalistic set of internal explanations that would ultimately direct the course of today's system of medicine. So he was the first guy to say, oh, you know what? I saw this dude eating this moldy looking piece of bread. Now he's puking and got diarrhea. Maybe that has something to do with it. So, he's figuring it out back in the day. The same search for rational, naturalistic causes of all disease is the primary aim of every medical research laboratory in the contemporary Western world. In the Western world, that's true. They're researching everything, trying to figure out what causes this, how to cure this, and everything like that. Sometimes in the East, there's still a little bit of, mysticism. Like I studied Chinese herbal medicine, and, we have too much wind, too much water, and things of that nature in that. Even though there is a little something to some of that, sometimes not so much. So, again, it's your culture that you come up in that can also lead you to beliefs that you hold. So that's why science is important, because you have the scientific method, and you can go through and try to prove, why is this right, and have empirical evidence. And then it's just not a belief, it is a fact. That's where I'm going to leave you for today. I hope that helped you figure out maybe a little bit more about why you do what you do. Please like and share this educational program around the world. And that's what this is, an educational program. It's not designed to diagnose or treat any mental illness. And if anything I said triggered you, or you think it's a problem in your life, then by all means, contact your mental health professional. If you want to help me out, subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you want to help me out even more, go to my Patreon page and become a patron. The link to that is in my posts. And thanks for watching or listening. That's all for now. Until next time.